Thank you all for joining this panel discussion on the future of collaboration between research and industry. My name is Jude Sheeran, and I lead some of AWS's innovation efforts across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. I'm standing in today for Max Peterson, who is unable to join us due to illness, and I know that Max was very much looking forward to the discussion and will be watching with great interest. Amazon, being a major user and actor in the advancement of artificial intelligence and robotics, has a profound interest not only in related research, but in enabling and accelerating research in all fields. As a representative of industry, we believe that there are at least 4 ways in which we can help in a truly and increasingly digital era. First, ultimately, we are consumers of technologies and skills that the academic and related organizations produce. And so helping you understand our challenges and opportunities on behalf of those we serve seems sensible. Secondly, we can help you reduce the so-called time to science by helping you become expert in the broadest and deepest array of cloud technologies available today. Thirdly, we can help you reduce time to market, not least via our global business support network, AWS Activate, which can help startups and spin-offs take their first steps as new companies. And lastly, our platform enables cost-effective, secure, and instantly scalable international collaboration. So let us start with some introductions from our distinguished panel, to whom we are very grateful for their time and for the impending insights. Starting please with you, Sir Nigel Shadbolt.
Hello, yes, it's great to be with you. I'm Nigel Shadbolt. I'm a professor of computer science here at the University of Oxford, also a head or principal of Jesus College, one of the constituent colleges of the University of Oxford, and chair and co-founder of the Open Data Institute. And I've had nearly 40 years of experience of artificial intelligence in its many forms and fashions.
Thank you for joining us. And now on to Dr. Lim King Hui.
Hi, my name is King Hui, and I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of High Performance Computing, or IHPC, where we focus research in the area of modeling, simulation, and AI. And I'm also concurrently the Executive Director of the AI Cube Technology Center, where we focus on AI in order to impact society. Now, I'm an engineer by training, and my personal interest is in the integration of AI together with physics-based modeling and simulation, and also to explore the applications of AI in healthcare as well as manufacturing.
And we're very happy to have you. Thank you and welcome. Professor Mike Wooldridge.
Hi, my name is Mike Wooldridge. I'm head of Department of Computer Science here at the University of Oxford. I'm also head of the AI and Machine Learning Research team within the Department of Computer Science. I've been an AI researcher for 30 years or so. I also have the pleasure of being one of the scientific advisors to the AI Singapore program, and it's great to see some old friends from Singapore joining us today.
Welcome and thank you, Mike. On to Mr. Kuseng Meng.
Hello, hi, I'm Seng Meng, Deputy Director in AI Singapore. We are a national program that was established by National Research Foundation back in 2017. And what I do inside is to help companies to co-create deployable AI solutions to solve their business problem, and as well at the same time groom a core of AI engineers so that they can help to sustain this innovation. Thank you for inviting me.
Great to have you. Thank you so much. And last but definitely not least, Professor Mohan Kankanhalli.
Hi, I'm Mohan Kankanhalli. I'm a professor of computer science at the National University of Singapore. I'm also the dean of its School of Computing. I personally work in the area of multimedia content understanding, multimedia systems. I've been involved in image and video understanding for a long time, almost 30 years. I'm very excited to be here on this panel. I just would like to mention our school was heavily involved in the proposal for AI Singapore, which is being run by the National University of Singapore.
Fantastic. It's a privilege to have you with us. Thank you so much. How does academia currently engage with industry in the context of research? Professor Mike Wooldridge from Oxford, perhaps you could start us off.
So the core, the nub for this collaboration to happen is common interest. We as a university are not driven primarily by commercial interest. Our research spans from pure curiosity-driven research, where we're not interested whether it's got any applications or whether it's useful in any kind of real-world sense, right through to stuff which is directly working on industry problems. But where we find that these collaborations most usefully happen is where there is common interest, where there is a problem that our researchers, it's on their agenda, they want to look at this problem, where they think this problem is a scientifically interesting problem, that's also key to this, and they're working on it, and where that also aligns with something which industry is working on. And that's the point at which things can come together and be really useful. There's often a misconception about what universities do in terms of research. We're not contract researchers. We don't just take research contracts that people come to us and say, we'd like you to do this. We only do it if it's something which is on our agenda. So that common interest absolutely has to be the nub of it. And we find that common interest absolutely everywhere, because a lot of the problems that the world is facing today can only be solved through the use of advanced scientific and technological techniques, the kind of things that we are working on. So we're increasingly seeing these synergies aligning, where there's a problem that we think is an important scientific problem that we are just interested in solving anyway, which is also aligned with what a company is doing. But it's that common interest, and I think for listeners that are thinking of working with universities, when you go to them, it's important to understand, universities aren't just cheap programmers. Now, I'm sorry to tell you that I have had occasions where people have viewed us as sort of, a cheap resource. Rather than go to another company to do the coding, you'd go to a university to do it. That's not what we do at all. We have our research agenda, and it's when we're working on something which is aligned with industry. And there's a range of different mechanisms for doing that. The most desirable mechanisms for us are long-term strategic relationships. And long-term strategic relationships is where there is a big body of work. So, for example, historically in the University of Oxford, Rolls-Royce, the jet engine part of the Rolls-Royce car company, they fault diagnosis on jet engines, and this was a really important problem for them. And we had a group that was working on them that built a very long-term strategic relationship, which involved funding a number of PhD students over a long period of time, a number of researchers over a long period of time. And the reason that that's important to us is, bluntly, the less bureaucracy that's involved in the research, the better. And long-term strategic relationships means you don't have to review these relationships every year or every 6 months. You're not constantly having to go through that. You can focus on these problems over a long period of time. But there are many other mechanisms as well. The most common kind of mechanism is where there is one specific problem that a company is interested in, where they know that our researchers are working on it, and they fund a research project in that area, typically a postdoc or a PhD student for a period of, say, 3 to 5 years or something like that. Then there are lighter weight engagements where a company is interested just in some general kind of problem. What could we do in this space? And they maybe fund a DPhil student to work in that area. And then at the very kind of lightest, there are companies that just want to see what we're doing. What are the current research things that you are doing? Can we have a seat at the table to see what your researchers are working on? So that's the nub of this is common interest. That's where it really, really works. Where there is a problem which is on our agenda, it's also on the agenda of the company, and that's where the most fruitful engagements happen. Beyond that, then, there's a wide range of mechanisms to engage with our researchers, and we're increasingly geared up towards doing that.
Thank you for that introduction and for the advice contained. Who would like to build on that?
Could I just say, I think that, obviously, as a representative of the same department that Mike heads up, I would echo many of the points that he makes. I think it's also important to understand that the dynamic, often the academic is pursuing their research agenda, and they will really sometimes have interests which don't necessarily precisely align with what the market needs, or indeed a capability that the research has, the researcher may not think as the most important aspect of what they do, but the market might kind of see the importance of. So this constant dialogue, a constant discussion around the nature of the research endeavor and what is and isn't possible to kind of realize in an implementation context is really important. I mean, the other thing I do, I head up the human-centered computing group within the department, and there, quite often the important thing is to talk with, the dialogue is between not just the engineering achievements, but how this is going to actually fit within a human context, in the workplace, in a workflow. And again, those considerations, those deliberations are things that industry and business, and indeed the public and private sector know, and have to be important constraints on any of the research that's going to ultimately be deployed. So I think a ruthless focus around the sorts of problems being solved. And perhaps when we come on to describe some of the things that our institute affiliations do, the Open Data Institute, when we work with organizations, public and private, to try and build a better data ecosystem, then it's precisely trying to understand what the real world problem is, as opposed to sometimes the research academics' principal concern can be somewhat remote from that. You need honest conversations around the research aspiration on the one hand and problems that may have real deployment opportunities on the other.
Great. Dr. Lim Ken Hui, I saw you nodding there. Would you have anything to add?
Well, I fully agree with what Mike as well as Nigel shared. Maybe I'll just add onto another point, which is that over the years, as far as A-Star is concerned, we have also developed various models of collaboration, because we have also been innovating on how we can go beyond the typical one-to-one collaboration with companies into something a lot even broader. So, for example, like we have established joint labs, which is what Mike is essentially implying, where there's very tight coupling, there's co-development of roadmaps. We essentially walk the journey together. And we have also, over the years, innovated in terms of a consortium model. One example is our aerospace consortium, where we bring together companies which are essentially competing with one another, such as Rolls-Royce with Pratt & Whitney, Airbus, Boeing, to talk about what key future areas such as sustainability, electrification, digitalization, so that we could really look at what are important research agendas 5-10 years out into the future, so that we could see how we could bring in research as well as capability development to help the companies to push the boundaries.
Any further thoughts on that question?
First of all, I think I come from a completely different institution than Mike and Nigel, but I'm complete agreement with what they have expressed. I think we share the same philosophy in academia across the world, and common interest is the underpinning of any industry engagement. I do not want to repeat what they have already highlighted, but I just want to tell the audience about a new trend which we are seeing. Traditionally, a lot of professors on sabbaticals did spend time in industry, but as in the area of AI, we are seeing an increasing phenomenon of professors taking time off from the university and spending time at companies, doing research in a company setting. And there are a variety of reasons for doing that. Sometimes it is the access to data or users or computational resources, and the ability to do rapid experiments and see the research ideas being applied in a real customer setting very quickly. So this is something which we have observed. A lot of our professors are, especially in AI and robotics, which is the theme of this series, to be greatly engaged with industry. Of course, there are positive aspects of it, and there are also certain negative aspects of it.
Great, fantastic. Okay, let's move on to the second question, related indeed to the first. And we heard about the importance of aligned objectives between academia and industry. And this question back to Dr. Lim Keng-hui. How are research institutes such as A*STAR, the Open Data and the Alan Turing Institute aligning with industry needs? So how? Starting please with you, Dr. Lim Keng-hui.
A*STAR is a mission-oriented science and technology organization. So our mission is to, which is written in our charter, is to create economic impact as well as to improve lives. So as far as the research agenda is concerned, every year we undertake easily more than 1,500 projects. I mentioned some of them are in the form of joint labs, one-to-one projects, consortia. And through this connection, through this experience, we get to understand the challenges of companies, both near-term as well as long-term. And this knowledge and this relationship has allowed us to guide our research agenda and also to make sure that what we do is industry aligned. Now, on the other hand, we also collaborate very extensively with the universities in order to continue to do research, looking at more use-inspired basic research, so that we continuously is able to bring new knowledge into into higher TRL, and then do translational research with companies to push the state of the art. And earlier I mentioned that we are also constantly innovating in terms of our collaboration models with companies. Earlier I cited examples of consortium, of joint labs. Now, a couple of years ago, we also started things such as model factories. In model factories, specifically in the area of digital manufacturing, we could set up lines in which we could test bed and showcase AI human-machine collaboration in order to push the future of manufacturing, where we can collaborate with companies as well as their supply chain to test bed new technologies before we scale up. Now, the other model which we are also actively doing is skills as well as knowledge transfer through secondments of researchers to companies. So I think earlier Mohan mentioned about research, academics, taking a leave of absence. So, but in our case, it is a very dedicated, deliberate secondment of researchers to the companies, so as to transfer know-how, transfer IP, transfer skills. And also using this kind of secondment, we can also learn about the domain challenges, as well as some of the challenges, both near-term and short-term challenges in the company. Now, I just want to also say that in Singapore, the teamwork at the ecosystem level is very important. So we often coin the term Singapore Inc. So in this particular case, for A*STAR, we work very closely with the Economic Development Board, which essentially does industry promotion of multinationals, and also the Enterprise Singapore, which looks after the small and medium enterprises on sectorial needs. So currently, we are developing the 5-year R&D strategy and research agenda, which will take us through over the next 5 years. And also to make sure that the 5-year strategy is aligned with the industrial transformation plan. Because Singapore is a small country, so which is why we make sure that there's a concerted effort across the ecosystem to work on a holistic approach to transform the industry, all the way from the R&D side, the technology development, government incentive, policy and regulation, and so forth. So it's a very tightly knitted, concerted effort to do that. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Anybody else have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just would echo many of those points. Talking now in the context of the Open Data Institute, which I co-founded with Tim Berners-Lee, about almost 10 years ago now. That's a not-for-profit. It's independent of both government and universities, but works closely with universities. And the whole mission for the ODI is to open up the data ecosystem, to build a foundation of open data that is freely and publicly available for both public and private use, but to also understand that different types of data, from personal to shared data, have different requirements, different licensing, different opportunities, different challenges. Now, in doing that work, of course, data is in some sense the fabric against which many of our modern digital technologies are able to succeed. Of course, absolutely the case with artificial intelligence, large amounts of data being consumed and used by very many of these advanced algorithms. The challenges here have to do with not just interfacing with industry, not just with the private sector. We've worked actually quite closely with the Singaporean government, which has its own open data initiatives, had government officials visiting, where we have worked out what the policy, what the regulatory landscape needs to be to begin to open up data so that it is a common good, that it's a new kind of infrastructure, essentially, that has to be engineered and looked after and curated. Now, when you look at that kind of opportunity set, you're really asking what skills you need to deploy. And clearly, data literacy is important. You've got to need a workforce and a scientific capability to work with the data that's there, to understand what's available, and to also understand its limitations. And within all of that, some really quite deep questions around the ethics and the responsible use of technology. And I would say one of the really interesting features of taking your ideas into the world of application deployment in public and private contexts, in government and in business, in education, in health, is that you hit those ethical and those regulatory challenges. You really do bruise your toe on reality. And that can be very helpful. It's something that I think the interchange and the exchange between academia and industrial deployment, government policy, it's a really important dialogue to understand the limits and the actual constraints you might want to put on various forms of data exploitation, the issues around its ethical deployment, whether or not there are any issues around bias or disequities in the data that's being used. So we find from the Open Data Institute's point of view that constant exchange between policy, regulation, if you like, responsible innovation, and the research is something that's particularly prevalent in AI and human-centered computing challenges.
Yeah, fantastically important work indeed. Thank you all for your contributions to the answers to that question. Moving on to the third question for you, Koo Seng Meng in Singapore. How can agencies such as AI Singapore play an intermediary role in bringing industry closer to research communities?
Okay, I think organizations like AI Singapore not just play an intermediary role, but also an important role in bridging the supply and the demand equation of AI innovation. As Mike said earlier about aligning the business interests, is all about aligning both the supply as well as the demand side. So what AI Singapore does, or similar organization like us does, is actually becoming the important bridge, the conduit between the researchers as well as the business decision maker. How? By doing so, to have the ability to understand the research output of all those professors and university in sufficient depth to map them into the needs of the business demand. In fact, as AI Singapore, one of our main charter is to do industry projects with deployable AI solution. One of the key adoption barrier we find in doing such project is actually the articulation of the business value of the AI research. So media has probably done a great job, maybe too much, of hyping up AI and as a magic bullet. So someone or some organization like AI Singapore, which can act as a conduit, becomes that trusted advisor to both the industry and the research communities to sustain the flow of innovation both ways, by being able to align the long-term interest or the long horizon of AI researchers plus the short time horizon of business.
Thank you for starting us off. Over to Mike Woolbridge, please.
Yeah, so I put my hand up just to interject on a completely different point, but actually I think Kuseng made some really valuable points out there, particularly in areas like AI. There are all sorts of snake oil salesmen and charlatans out there who want to sell you anything basically, and they're calling it AI. And actually, you are absolutely right, Kuseng. There's a really valuable role for universities as we don't have a commercial interest. We can just tell you the reality of what is possible with contemporary AI techniques and what isn't. And I think that trusted broker, as I think you described it, is really important. But actually, the point I was going to make was actually a slightly different one. I mean, which was about the general issue of how universities get their academics, people like me and Nigel and the other academics on the panel, to work on problems that are of sort of real world interest. And if you went back 30 years, actually there was a bit of that in most Western universities, quite a lot in the US, but in the UK, it wasn't really a big thing. And since then, there have been progressively more attempts by governments and by universities in the West to get their academics to focus not on ivory tower problems, but actually to spend more of their energy thinking about real world problems. Now, I would be lying if I said that wasn't a work in progress. It very much is a work in progress. But actually, universities are much better at doing that right now than they were, say, 30 years ago. And just in terms of that interface between the university and industry, it was 30 years ago, it was a square peg and a round hole. We were talking different languages and we didn't know how to talk to each other. I think we're much better at doing that now. We're not perfect, but we are much better at doing that. And also the universities now, certainly in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same elsewhere in Singapore and elsewhere, provide actual incentives for staff whereby they can get recognized for doing research, which is not just sort of deep classical ivory tower type research, but research that is has real world impact. That's the phrase we use in the UK. And those incentives didn't really exist 30 years ago. They do exist now. I say it's a work in progress, but we're much better at doing it.
Thank you. Back to Kuseng then.
Now, to add on to what Mike said, I mean, absolutely right. We generally will see professors that still would like to focus their effort on groundbreaking research, more of paper publications. There are still groups of professors who are bitten by the startup bugs and they do want to be able to profit from the IP that they have created. There is also this third type of organization sometimes we see, for example, like Element AI, that help to bridge the best of both worlds, where Element AI acts as the so-called business developer and they do have a network of professors on retainer so that at any point in time when they find interesting projects, they know who to look for, and the researchers and the professors actually don't mind taking time off or a short while just to do that, preferably to beef up some of the upcoming publications they have. But after that, they are free to go back to do what they love. I find that kind of working relationship seems to be a win-win here for the academia still to be able to fulfill some of the requirements sometimes the government set on them to do a couple of research, to do a couple of industry projects, but still they would like to go back to do what they love. Yeah.
Thank you. Professor Kanganhali.
Yes, I wanted to add on to what Seng Ming had said about the role of AI Singapore. And I come from the academic side of AI Singapore. I think they have done a wonderful job by being a matchmaking platform. A lot of industries come with problems to AI Singapore. And I think they have developed a deep understanding of the expertise within the university ecosystem in Singapore, especially in US, because of physical proximity. And I think they're able to very efficiently match companies and problems to professors, which I think would be extremely difficult, especially for small companies. So I think that's an extremely valuable role played by agencies such as AI Singapore.
Thank you. And staying with you for the moment, Professor Kanganhali, how can industry executives engage with researchers and research institutions to address their challenges and opportunities?
I think there are multiple ways of doing that. I mean, you could use as a push and a pull approach. A push would be that an industry executive, they would have some problems in the industry for which they have no solution or the expertise for that solution within the company. And therefore they can then go out with this specific problem to be solved directly to a university or to an agency like AI Singapore, and then try to find the right people who could help them with the solution. On the other hand, there could also be a much more long-term engagement in which basically they would spend time cultivating the knowledge landscape in academia and be engaged with the universities over a longer period. I think if you go back to the point which Mike made very early on, I think there has to be some common interest. And the common interest presupposes that both these parties are in some form of a communication and engagement over a long period of time. So I would see that industry executives need to be engaged with university, not just for a specific problem, but in general for a long term kind of understanding of what kind of problems do professors work on, and they don't necessarily work on industry problems, and in fact they shouldn't necessarily work on industry problems. There is also a role to be played by funding agencies. And I'll give you a very specific example which is working very well in Singapore. So I had a center called NCRIP, which is the NUS Center for Research in Privacy Technologies. We've been funded by Singapore's National Research Foundation. And what they have done is they have only given us 80% of the funding which we wrote in the proposal. For the rest 20%, they have told us that you go and get $1 from industry and we'll give you $1 from NRF. So technically, if we manage to get 20% of that funding, we will get 120% of the funding. So there is an incentive for the universities in such a funding mechanism to go and be engaged with industry. On the other hand, for the industry partners also it is attractive because when they work with the university, they spend $1 and they get $2 worth of research done. So I think there could be institutional mechanisms which are set up which could kind of lubricate the entire machinery in a much better way.
Fantastic, thank you. Dr. Lim Keng Hu, a question for you. How has the digital era changed the way that academia and industry collaborate, and what are the new opportunities?
Well, I think the digital era has certainly opened up very significant opportunities. And I echo previous views that nowadays every company which I meet, whether it is in consumer industry, fast-moving consumer goods, aerospace companies, chemicals, and so forth, are all interested in AI as well as digitalization. You can almost be assured that if you ask them beforehand what is their interest, AI will come up the top of their interest. And interestingly, this year, the trend is even accelerating due to COVID, where many companies are realizing the need to go digital and to do it fast. So right now, there's a very concerted effort to push companies nationally, especially the more small and medium enterprises, to accelerate the digital transformation. So to give you one example, we've had a lot of projects with hospitals in the area of digital health, where we apply a lot of big data, AI technologies into clinical applications. So they've been moving along fine. But the thing is that now with COVID, we are sensing this urgency by a lot of clinical institutions to really push digital technology. So for example, like we have very quickly within months already deployed an AI system to read chest X-ray in order to pick up pneumonia from X-ray images. And we have already developed and pushed out very quickly within weeks, AI-based chatbots to interact with patients, wearables to monitor patients' condition to ensure that people don't crash. And all these were done actually within a matter of months. Previously, it would be taking us a couple of years discussion, negotiation, RRB, etc. in order to get there. But within this couple of months, we are able to get a lot of things done. So I think the digital era is now moving even faster than before, where institutions, research organizations, IHLs can come in. Is first of all, to bring greater awareness about what R&D technology can do, collaborate in order to fill the company's capability gaps, as well as training, education, and with the digital era moving really, really fast, this is where as an ecosystem we also need to be very agile and to even keep ahead of the curve, so that we constantly have something to value add. And I think I'm now seeing a lot of opportunities open up virtually in many areas where AI could be applied, whether it is in robotics, so that we reduce reliance on labor. E-commerce is really accelerating. More and more people are now buying online. We are also talking about the digitalization of the supply chain. We're also talking about education technologies, of how to deliver content through online, and how do you use data as well as AI in order to personalize education. I mentioned about healthcare, where we are seeing a lot of acceleration and adoption of AI, where telehealth and all that, which used to be somewhat remote with a lower acceptance rate by patients, are now really picking up. And I could go on, whether it's environment, built environment, etc. So I think it's really opening up a lot of opportunities, and we really have to move fast. Thank you.
Fascinating, thank you. Moving on, how can we shorten the route and bridge the gap in technology transfer from academia to industry? So Nigel Shadbolt.
Thank you. Yeah, well, actually, we've touched on this already, and it may sound slightly counterintuitive, but I think to shorten that lead time, you've got to think long term. You've got to be discriminating and do the due diligence over the AI technology being offered. We've touched on that too. I think it helps in what I have seen with successful collaborations, where there's a process of not distant horizon scanning. You might think of this as near horizon scanning, to understand, to mutually build a good understanding between the problems that the industrial context faces and what research is under development, that's in development. That horizon scanning on both sides sometimes allows really quite unanticipated technologies and approaches to come to the fore that wouldn't necessarily have been the first on the list for the industry partner to be reaching out for. The other thing that I've noticed works, I mean, grand challenges are grand, but actually sprints, challenge series that are more compact, more in the style of agile programming with clear goals and deliverables. These intense periods of activities can really build fantastic collaborative joint endeavors. But if you do that, you've got to have fallow periods as well. One of the problems with setting up these longer term relationships that you want to deliver short, you want to shorten the distance to exploitation, is that you can't be working flat out all the time. So you've got to build in periods when you do, in a certain sense, more intense engagement, and periods when you're more reflective, more evaluative. And I would say one other thing, make your data available. And that's one of the most valuable things that industrial partners can do, is they sit on assets that could be really, really extraordinarily valuable to the research, academic research lab. And a challenge you'll have in all of this is to find key sponsors. We've talked a lot about institutional alignment, but actually so often this is about the individuals who are leading these programs, the individuals who are vested in these collaborations. You need to find those people at the program level, and you need a succession plan, because invariably people are promoted, move on. It can't be about just the reliance on that individual relationship. If it's going to be longer term, you've got to build some notion of how you will keep the actual collaboration in the hands of people who care about it. And I would, perhaps a final injunction is, don't asset strip the universities. We are happy to provide our students, our postdocs and our professors, but in a certain sense, we have to find a balance point where we can actually mutually support one another. I think if you kind of take these as a whole, you naturally begin to shorten the route to deployment.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, widespread nodding in agreement, particularly on that last point across the panel. Over to you, Koo Seng Meng.
Several points as Nigel made actually resonate very closely. And one of the things I find about what you say about agile, what you say about building the core, and I like the term about asset stripping. That's something that I'm going to use next time, is there's an approach where we can try to bridge the gap between academia and industry, and that's bottom up. That's where companies actually invest to groom a core of their own staff to go back to school to complete their postgraduate and to bring back the R&D skills and experience back to the organization, so that in theory, it could make the company more agile and responsive to research output that's coming out of the universities. There's of course the added benefit of the companies having closer relationship with the staff, with the university through the staff alma mater. I mean, if you look at what's happening in the world now, jobs are being decimated, and government is just pouring monies to companies not to retrench staff. And we can actually use that advantage, not to retrench staff to continue to do the old things, but to keep the staff and send them off for postgraduate studies or some higher studies, so that while they are being kept on the payroll, they're actually learning some new skills and competencies that when the pandemic goes over, the company is actually in a stronger position to come back, to bounce back, to build up these new core competencies. So in a flip side, it will be actually the universities now becoming a very, very important source of higher level learning and higher level digitalization and transformation for the company itself. So that's one take, I would say, how to shorten and to bridge the gap. Yeah.
Thank you. Back to Professor Mike Wooldridge, please.
Yeah, just to add on to and amplify the comments that Nigel and Koo Seng were making, and I'm also going to remember the asset stripping phrase. That's exactly because it does feel sometimes that that's what companies want to do. But I'll just add on another dimension to that. I mean, what I think all companies working in tech and AI in particular at the moment are really feeling is the lack of skills out there. That's what we do when we're not doing research. We're training the students that you're going to hire, and of course, you know, we're very proud of the quality of the students that we train. We turn out absolutely brilliant students. We don't just train them in programming languages or just being able to apply sort of cookie cutter approaches to problems. We turn them into thinkers who can think deeply about hard problems. And if you asset strip, you know, you're going to kill off that source of students. So I think it's very important for companies to remember that role that universities play. You know, we are turning out the people that you need to hire. I think there is also an opportunity there for companies. I very often in my head of department role, and very often every week, I have companies phoning me up talking about building a relationship with Oxford. And in most cases, what it means is we'd really like to hire more of your students. And a typical sort of approach, you know, we pay really good salaries. You know, good salaries are the beginning of the discussion. Our students who study a DPhil in AI at the University of Oxford, they know they can get a good salary. They can go anywhere in the world, literally. You know, they can take their pick. And good salaries are just a baseline assumption. They want to be excited about what they're working on. They want to feel that the problems that they're working on are going to lead to a better world. They want to feel that they're part of the solution and not part of the problem. So I would really advise companies, when you're thinking of going to NUS or Oxford or those, and you're talking to potential students, it isn't just about salaries. Of course, you're going to have to offer good salaries to get top-rate students. You've got to get them excited about what they're doing. You've got to make them feel that they're part of something which is going to be important. It's going to be part of a better world. You've got to show them, you know, that this is not just a kind of a dull office job. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to attract them. And that's really, really important. I mean, I've had so many slightly embarrassing conversations with companies where they just haven't got that.
Thank you. A few final brief comments, please, from Dr. Lim Keng-hui.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo many of the points mentioned, for example, from Sing Bing. So there's been a lot of emphasis right now on the areas of skills. Skills not for students, but really skills for for working adults. That learning is continuous. That education really begins after you graduate. It doesn't end with graduation, but it really begins after you graduate. So in Singapore, a lot of the institutions of higher learning are really looking at how do you retrain, reskill working adults so that you equip them with new knowledge in order to support, you know, industrial transformation in a new world, because things are really transforming very, very fast. I mentioned about you know, COVID as well as the new transformation which was really accelerating the need for digitalization. So a couple of years ago, we invited the chief digital officer of the largest bank in Singapore, called the DBS Bank, to give a talk, because this is a company which has been very successful in their digital transformation, where they introduced a lot of data science and AI into the company in order to accelerate change. And so they told us that, he told us that they embark on a very inclusive process where they not only send staff for training, but they also make sure that staff from all levels, you know, right down to the admin staff who may be unfamiliar with things like programming and all that, to jump on board. And then through boot camps, you know, through learning from colleagues, they are able to get up to speed. So it's a very inclusive process where everyone is being brought along this journey so that the journey can be a lot more sustainable long term. And that's how you could build a really great company. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm sure our audience would join me in thanking you for your rich and enormously insightful answers. What I'd like to do now is, in conclusion, is ask each of you for a call for action for academia, for industry, or both. And we'll start with Sir Nigel Shadbolt, who has already given us in one call to action about making data available, but perhaps you can think of another.
Well, that would be one, but I think the other call to action is to when we co-create our collaborations. It is about co-creation. It is about sitting down and mapping that near horizon. And I think the exciting opportunity with the program that we're launching here is to have that serious conversation, a conversation that understands not just the technical elements of what we do, but the ethical and regulatory impact of what we do, so that we build a technology which empowers us and doesn't oppress us.
In the past, there were some notable companies which did fundamental research, like IBM Research or Bell Labs. But if you see today, practically no company in the world can do engagement of long-term thinking for society, for humanity.
I mean, besides asset stripping, all that is to groom a new generation of subject matter experts that can bridge between the academia as well as the industry need, especially with things like AI. We have terms like data translator coming out. I would propose that probably AI translator would be a very, very good job role in the future as we continue to accelerate towards digitization.
Thank you. And Dr. Lim Keng-hui.
Well, there are several ways that you could approach innovation. You could, of course, wait, or you could buy, or you could build. So, companies may wait because it may be too risky, but essentially taking no action and remaining static can be a risk. Now, second, of course, is to buy, where you wait for a technology or capability to be available and then you acquire them. But through this way, you do not build deep technologies, you do not control the IP, and you may not be able to sustain far. And then the third, which is to build, it requires the most effort. But this is where companies could really sustain capability development as well as impact, and they can go very far. So my call for action really is don't wait. Develop capabilities as soon as you can. You can start off with buying, but over time you should really build capabilities, because this is how great companies are being built.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, all that remains for me to do is to once again thank our panel, thank the organisers, the Asia Pacific Assistive Robotics Association, and in particular Oliver Tian for his guidance, to Charlotte Mohen-Paufi at the University of Oxford for her determination in making this happen, and to all of you out there who have taken the time to join us today. Thank you.